The sun was setting on what had been another perfect day, a quiet evening shared between Daniel and his wife, Lisa, along with his brother, Mark. It had always been this way, the three of them, inseparable. The laughter, the shared moments, the countless memories that had bonded them over the years. It was a life filled with joy, routine, and the comfort of knowing they had each other. Daniel had always seen his brother as more than just family. Mark was his best friend. There were no secrets between them, no walls. He trusted Mark with his life, and Lisa, his wife, had been the love of his life since high school. Together, they made up the perfect trio. Or so Daniel had thought, but that evening, something felt different. Something that Daniel couldn't shake, no matter how hard he tried. It started small, a lingering touch between Mark and Lisa, an innocent glance that lingered too long. Daniel brushed it off at first, assuming it was nothing, but a nagging feeling kept growing within him. He'd never felt more uncertain in his life. One evening, a few weeks after the unsettling incident, Daniel returned home earlier than expected. He was looking forward to spending a quiet evening with Lisa. But when he opened the door, what he saw made his heart stop. There, in the living room, were Lisa and Mark. They weren't just talking, they were holding hands, exchanging whispers, sharing a moment that felt far too intimate. It was the look on their faces that shattered Daniel. It wasn't just a friendly conversation, it was something deeper. Something more. Confusion, anger, and disbelief washed over Daniel. His stomach churned. He couldn't bring himself to speak, yet he didn't need to. His eyes met Lisa's, and he saw it, the guilt. Mark's face, too, was full of regret. Daniel's heart began to race. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. The world as he knew it was collapsing around him. The confrontation that followed was inevitable. Daniel demanded answers. His voice shook with emotion, but his words were clear. He could barely look at either of them as Lisa, with tears in her eyes, finally confessed. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Mark and Lisa had been having an affair for the past 6 months. The anger that followed was raw, intense, and uncontrollable. Daniel's brother, the person he had always trusted, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. His wife, the woman he had built a life with, had torn his heart apart. He couldn't process it. He didn't want to. Days passed in a haze of shock and heartbreak. Daniel couldn't understand why this had happened. He had been nothing but devoted to Lisa. They had built a beautiful life together, and Mark had always been a part of that. His mind replayed every memory, every moment, trying to find a reason, an explanation, anything to make sense of the pain he was feeling. But nothing did. The betrayal was too deep. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel's sense of self began to erode. He questioned everything, his relationship, his worth, his entire life. How could they have done this? How could they betray him like that? The questions haunted him, but the answers never came. Lisa and Mark both apologized repeatedly, but their words were empty to him. The damage had been done. Daniel found himself drifting further away, emotionally numb. He felt like a stranger in his own home, walking around in a fog, unable to process the depth of his hurt. There were moments when he considered walking away from it all, from the house, from the memories, from the life he had built. But where would he go? How could he leave everything behind? It was his life, his family, yet, as time passed, the ache began to fade, replaced by a sense of emptiness. There was no comfort to be found in revenge, no solace in anger. He knew he couldn't move forward without some kind of resolution. He had to understand why this had happened, and what was left of his family. Then, one day, the unexpected happened. His father, a man who had been quiet and reserved throughout the entire ordeal, called him into his office. Daniel had been avoiding him for weeks. He didn't know how to face the man who had watched the unraveling of his life without stepping in. But his father insisted. Sitting across from each other, Daniel could see the concern in his father's eyes. He had always admired his father's strength, the wisdom that seemed to radiate from him. But today, there was something different in his gaze. Something vulnerable. Something that made Daniel uneasy. "I need to tell you something, son," his father said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "There's more to this story than you know." Daniel looked at his father, confused. What could he possibly have to say that would explain any of this? His father took a deep breath before continuing. "The truth is, I've been keeping a secret from you. Something that goes back many years. And it's about Mark and Lisa." Daniel's heart raced again. His mind was already racing through possibilities. What could his father possibly mean? What could make the betrayal seem like anything but the devastation it had caused? His father's next words left him stunned. "Your mother and I, we weren't always the perfect couple you thought we were. Your brother, he wasn't always the man you think he is." The truth hit Daniel like a tidal wave. It was a truth he wasn't ready for, one he never could have imagined. The revelation from his father wasn't just about the affair, it was about something far deeper, a secret buried in the past that no one had ever spoken of. His father revealed that, years before Daniel had even met Lisa, there had been a complicated, emotional history between him, his mother, and Daniel's uncle. An unspoken tension, an unresolved conflict, that had affected the entire family dynamic in ways Daniel never understood. His father's confession left him reeling. For years, his family had been living in the shadow of these untold secrets. "Mark never knew this," his father said, his voice heavy with regret. "He's not just your brother by blood. There's a history, Daniel, a history that you need to know about. And it's time I told you." The shock of these revelations didn't come all at once. Daniel found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. Anger. Confusion. Sadness. But there was one thing that stood out above everything else: clarity. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about a cycle of pain that had been passed down, from generation to generation. A pattern of mistakes that had shaped every relationship in their family. Mark wasn't just the villain in this story, he was a product of his own experiences, just as Daniel was. The healing process began, not with revenge, but with understanding. It was an uncomfortable, painful journey, but Daniel began to see that forgiveness wasn't just about letting Mark and Lisa off the hook, it was about freeing himself from the chains of resentment. This is just a portion of the first part of the story, and it has already started to unfold with deep emotional layers. The days after his father's revelation felt like a blur. Daniel was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, each moment pulling him in a different direction. His father's confession had shattered the image of his family he had always carried, but it also opened a door to understanding. As painful as it was to process, it made him realize that this pain wasn't just about betrayal. It was about generational cycles, patterns that had shaped his life, Mark's life, and even Lisa's actions. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. The betrayal by Mark and Lisa wasn't just about their choices, it was about the unresolved hurt and secrets that had been passed down. His father's hidden past wasn't an excuse for what had happened, but it gave him a lens through which to see his brother and his wife, not as mere perpetrators of betrayal, but as people struggling with their own unresolved pains. As Daniel began to reflect on his father's words, something began to change within him. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened or letting people off the hook, it was about reclaiming his peace. Forgiving them wasn't for their benefit, it was for his own. He had been holding on to anger for so long, and it was like carrying a heavy burden everywhere he went. One evening, after spending several days in deep reflection, Daniel decided he couldn't keep living in the past. He had to confront his brother and Lisa, not with anger or bitterness, but with the aim of understanding, even if that meant facing difficult truths. He called Mark and Lisa to meet. His heart raced as he prepared for the confrontation. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from them. Would they feel regret? Would they offer him the apology he needed to heal? Or was this meeting just another chapter in the chaos that had become his life? When Mark and Lisa arrived at Daniel's home, the tension was palpable. Daniel could see the guilt and shame on their faces before they even spoke. There was no easy way to begin, no perfect words to say. But the moment the conversation started, Daniel didn't feel the need to yell or demand answers. Instead, he found himself asking one simple question: why? Lisa, tears welling up in her eyes, spoke first. "I don't know how it happened. I never meant for things to get so out of control. I love you, Daniel. But I also loved Mark in a way I didn't understand at first. I can't explain it, but it was something that grew over time." Mark, looking almost ashamed, added, "I was wrong, Daniel. I betrayed you, and I don't know how to make it right. I wasn't thinking of you when I made my choices. But now, looking back, I can see how I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." The words they spoke were painful, but they were genuine. For the first time, Daniel saw them not as villains, but as people who had made mistakes, people